And all right, we're all set. Are you recording?
I am recording, yes.
Okay, good. Well, hello, everyone. I am here today with Karen Wong of the Meaning Code channel. Is it Meaning Code? The Meaning Code, right? And I'm delighted to have her as a guest on my channel today, because I have been following with great interest what she has been doing. She and I both had been on Paul Vanderklay's channel. I guess we're going back a couple years now, aren't we?
We are, yeah.
And then we've had a couple of discussions together on her channel, and she has been having the most fascinating bunch of guests. I don't know how she does it. She apparently hangs out with physicists and molecular biologists and economists and all kinds of people that are not in my world. And she has them on her channel. And yesterday, in fact, she had a conversation with Brett. What is Brett's last name?
Anderson.
Brett Anderson, who also was on Paul Vanderklay's channel. He's a evolutionary psychologist, I think, right? Fascinating conversation about self-organized or organizing complexity and criticality. Excellent. And a very Pageauian conversation, I must say.
Really?
And she's also had.
I thought it was like drinking from a fire hose.
She's also had a number of conversations with Michael, who's been on Paul Vanderklay and also is on the Randas a good deal, exploring, especially, I would say, the work of Barfield. That's a big part of who Michael is interested in. And I had a conversation with Ira on my channel, who I discovered by listening to him on Karen's channel. So she has been doing some fascinating things. And she made a comment, and this goes back some months, but she made a comment and I thought, ooh, I've got to explore this comment that she made. She said that she started her channel to answer a burning question. So I want to know what her burning question is or was, and how she thinks she has progressed in answering it. Well, I got to turn off my notifications here right quick so that we don't get interrupted by them. Sorry about that. Okay, Karen.
No problem. So it's interesting that was the comment that grabbed you, because that was the thing that grabbed me when I first started reading Jordan Peterson. I mean, obviously a lot of things grabbed me when I started listening to him, but when I started reading Maps of Meaning, he says in Maps of Meaning that he had finally found his question. Okay, and his question was related to, how is it that the world can be prepared to destroy itself? We're on the brink of nuclear destruction. How does that come about? And what can be done to undo that? That was his burning question. And that's what led him down the path of exploring all the archetypal stuff, you know, dealing with maps of meaning and the metaphorical stories and all of that. And you wouldn't think that the one would meet the other at all, right? So my burning question is very difficult to put into a capsule. Let me start by saying I fell into the channel and I fell into meeting all these people that have been on the channel. I don't hang out with people like that except online, and it's an absolutely wonderful experience to hang out with all those kinds of people online and to hang out with you. And it's one of the great privileges of my life that I get to talk to folks like you. So I want to start with why I got interested in Jordan Peterson in the first place. And that was because when I started listening to him, I saw he was talking about things that I had learned over the years through my walk with God. And he was putting different terminology on it, but they were the same lessons that I had learned. And I could pinpoint the time in my life when I had learned each lesson And so I'm listening to him and these lights are going off like, oh yeah, 1982, 1996. And it was such an exciting reminder of the path that I've come on in my life and all the anomalies that I've encountered and what I've learned. And then I started reading Maps of Meaning to try to know more about what he was teaching. And as I was reading Maps of Meaning, it's like, it's another language. It's so difficult. And I was page by page, I'd get up in the morning and I could maybe make my way through 2 pages or 3 pages at the most, really struggling to understand it because he's in psychology and physics and chemistry and biology and evolution, and he's taught and philosophy. He's talking about all these things I had no converse with at all. But I got to a certain point where all of a sudden it was like, oh, this exactly maps onto my thinking about creativity that I came to through learning the elements and principles of design. Why would that be? That makes no sense at all. Why would that became my translator key. So the elements and principles of design and what I had learned from that became my key to translating everything that he said from then on in Maps of Meaning. So I thought, that's very mysterious. So that was kind of my burning question. Why was that a translator key? So let me give you a little background on the idea of the elements and principles of design. This is something that they teach in art, not as an imposed structure, but as observations that have been made throughout all the centuries of people doing art and viewing art, that there's certain things that the eye looks for. So those things tend to end up in every work of art, whether it's, and this is really true, whether it's music or writing or painting or drawing, but I learned it in the context of drawing. So in drawing and painting, there are 7 elements. Those elements are the things that show up in every painting. Even without trying, they all show up. They're line, size, shape, direction, color, value, and texture. That happened, you'll see those in every painting you've ever looked at. Each one of those things relates to each other. So a line has a certain size, and it can also have a certain shape, and it can also have a certain color and a certain direction and a certain value and a certain texture. But there's also 8 principles that govern ways of making more interesting lines, more interesting sizes, more interesting shapes. And those principles are unity, harmony, contrast, dominance, repetition, variation, gradation, and balance. So you can see right away, even if you're looking at just the most basic iterations of all those things, you've built yourself a framework with, well, I don't know, 10 to the, I don't even know how many combinations there are, because then if you add in color, which has 256 million possibilities, even if you're just thinking about digital color. And so that means that every choice that you make when you're painting, there's this combinatorial explosion that John Vervaeke talks about, right? Too many potential choices. So once you start learning all these things and they frame the way that you approach your painting, you come to a realization, wait a minute, I have to have a narrower frame or I'm going to go crazy. So I found a guy who said, here's all you really have to think about: unity with variety. If you take all those things and compress them down, you get unity with variety. That is the one and the many. That's like the key to the universe, right? So that's one of the pieces of the simpler paradigm. another piece of the simpler paradigm is that when you realize the combinatorial explosion, you have to find a path forward for your own work that will be doable and will also provide you the maximum creativity. So for me, I found that when I constrained my options, then I was also creating a space for maximum creativity. Now that seems counterintuitive, but when you constrain your options and you begin to commit to these constrained options, then many, many, many possibilities occur to you. One of the teachers that I had, he said, you're going to do 20 paintings for this class, 2 big paintings every week, but all 20 paintings are going to be of the same subject. And the subject has to be in the same place on the frame. So if your subject is a teapot with 3 pieces of fruit, then you've got a teapot and 3 pieces of fruit. Every painting is going to be of that teapot and the 3 pieces of fruit, same size, same place on the frame. They don't have to be the same shape. They don't have to be using the same kind of line, or they don't have to use the same kind of color. So after you've done it 3 or 4 times kind of realistically, then you look at it and you think, well, what else am I going to do with this? Well, what if I change the character of the line? What if I change the contrast? What if I change the color combination? So maybe I limit my palette down to just 2 colors, or maybe I change the kind of tools that I'm using. Instead of using a very nice, beautiful brush that I bought at the store, I make a brush out of twigs. So you just get this, endless number of possibilities. But if you limit your tool set, you limit your materials, you limit your palette, and you choose a particular substrate. So you're either going to do it on canvas or on a piece of paper or on a piece of wood, whatever substrate you use, every one of those things has consequences in the final product. So even as I was working on this over the years, I was thinking, this really sounds so much like the way the universe is put together. The universe has a substrate, and everything in the universe has a substrate. And this idea of constraints or boundaries, which plays out in many ways in art. It's not just the constraints that you place on yourself, but each object in the painting has edges, and those edges play with each other. And the shapes on the canvas create their own edge. Even if a shape doesn't have an edge drawn on it, the edge where the shape meets the background, that creates an edge. And then I started thinking, well, everything in the universe is only a thing because it has a boundary. So somehow boundaries are fundamental to the way the universe is composed. So, boundaries, we typically think of city, state, nation. You can go down smaller, your community boundary or your family boundary. There's a limit. There's always a limit to where one thing stops and another thing begins. Psychologically, we have our boundaries of I am me, you are not me. So there needs to be an appropriate boundary between us in the way that we interact. And then when you get down to the physical level, every single thing has a boundary that makes it what it is and not something else. It's either what it is and not the substrate in which it exists, or it is what it is and it isn't the other thing next to it. So, and that's true whether we're talking about objects or entities or concepts, or even a whole domain of knowledge has a boundary. Then you have to start thinking, what's the character of the boundary? So when I look at art and I think about what makes a good boundary or what makes a good edge in art, I start thinking through, oh, there's the edge. Some places is sharp and some places it's very thin, in some places it's thick, in some places it's permeable, and in some places there's a little opening, because all these things make the art more interesting, but that's also what makes life possible. So I began to see that something about this simplified paradigm of the elements and principles of design works through every domain of knowledge. And that was when I had my talk with Paul, and I tried to explain to Paul what I was thinking about. And he challenged me to start a YouTube channel. He said, well, you gotta get out there and see if these ideas are correct or not correct, and talk to people. So I started trying to find people who would come on and talk to me, that I could explore what they're doing and inform myself on the one hand, but then also see if there were any reasons not to believe what I was believing. Was there a hole in it? Could I figure that out? And I didn't know how to start, but lo and behold, I get an email from this guy who says, I think you want to talk to me. He says, I do geochemistry. He said, I do geophysics. And I think we could have an interesting conversation. Gave me his email, I contacted him, and that's how we got started. And he was a fascinating person to talk to, but he gave me some other ideas of things that I was interested in. So I started following the YouTube algorithm, figuring I've got to learn something about physics, I've got to learn something about chemistry, I've got to learn something about biology, I've got to learn something about philosophy. And as I've gone down the YouTube algorithm and also kept up with Paul's YouTube channel and the people that he interviews and so forth, they've given me ideas of people to contact, and I've just happened to run into people in my life that I knew would be interesting to talk to. And so the one thing led to another, and that's how I met all these people.
So let me see if I can kind of isolate your question a little bit. Your question was, why is it that this one domain it's a combination of experience and technical learning that you've done with regard to art.
Mhm.
Why is it that the principles of this seem to operate on multiple layers of reality up to the whole universe and down into the very small, right?
Exactly.
That was kind of your question. Why would one thing why would I be able to interpret everything according to these principles? Why do these principles, in particular, you'd say unity and multiplicity, for example, and also the idea of boundary constraints, releasing creative energy or releasing creativity, all of those things, why would they have this kind of wide application? So that was your question. And how do you think you're doing in finding an answer? Do you think an answer is emerging to your question as you've gone through all of these conversations?
Absolutely. The thing that's been most interesting to me is that when I first started, I was trying to think in terms of all of the elements and all of the principles of design and where they line up with other domains of knowledge. Because when I first started, I was thinking there's all these domains of knowledge and levels of reality. And somehow I know that they're in different categories. A domain of knowledge is in a different category than a level of reality, but somehow they all seem to coexist in this space. And by levels of reality, I mean you have the quantum level, then you have the atomic level, and then the molecular level, and then you get up to the cellular level with biological life, and then you get up to the entity level of human beings and the consciousness level, and then you get into the astronomical level with galaxies. And So those are all the levels of reality, the way I see them. Well, at the physical level of reality includes everything from the quantum all the way up to the astronomical, but there's some sort of boundary between those things. There's a boundary, certainly a boundary between the quantum level and what we call our macro level, where we exist, because they've not been able to figure out what makes the one turn into the other.
Right.
So there's some kind of a boundary there. But then there's also physics and chemistry and biology, and each of those domains of knowledge has infinite potential for growth and increasing information. So you have all these different levels. And so I was trying to see where was the connecting point between each of those levels. Like, could I see, if I listened enough to quantum physics and Newtonian physics, could I see where there was a connecting point? If I listened enough to mathematics and physics, could I see where there's a connecting point? And if I listen to biology and psychology, can I see the connecting points? So I just kind of went into it with mind in flow state, just listening to people talk and seeing if my mind made any sort of connections. And when I first started out, I purposely tried not to impose my own idea. It's very hard to do that, but I tried, and sometimes I was more successful than other times. But what I also tried to do is what Jordan Peterson always talks about, that when you're really listening to somebody, you just, if something pops into your mind, you just tell them, oh, this is what popped into my mind when you said that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's usually a reason why that pops into your mind. And then you kind of try to make the connection. Why, what was that? So here's an arcane example. Today I was listening to a lecture about thermodynamics and the origin of life. And he was talking about high free energy and low free energy, and high entropy and low entropy, and how these things are different between natural processes and life processes. And into my mind popped this problem that I started out with when I first talked to the very first guy who was a geologist. We were discussing entropy, and we were discussing the idea of a ball perched at the top of a hill. Is that high entropy or low entropy? So I'm still puzzling with that. Is it high entropy or low entropy? Because the ball is just sitting there, which would, in one sense, mean it's low entropy. But in another sense, once that ball moves, it's going to increase in entropy very fast. So there's going to be increasing entropy once it starts moving. It has a potential entropy that's infinite, because it could go any direction down that mountain. You don't know which direction it's going to go. In the mountains all the way around, and you can divide it infinitely. So I think about those kinds of things, and then that makes me think, and then that starts to tie into a lot of other things I'm thinking about, and I start drawing these connections. And sometimes I wonder if I'm ADD, because I can get so far afield that I can't rein it in to figure out where it goes. But eventually, when I keep listening, it'll slot in and I'll go, oh, wow. So I need to go back and listen to re-listen to Brett Anderson on Monday, because he said something about entropy and evil. And I need to go back and re-listen to that, because I do think there's something very significant about the whole concept of entropy, which is so mysterious, especially when it relates to life and non-life. So
yeah, it's like life is anti-entropy in a way,
yeah.
So,
but at the same time, Mary, this is what I was thinking about. When the sperm meets the egg and life begins, maybe that is our instantiation, our example of first life. Maybe we can see in that move a miniature picture of how first life worked. Because when the sperm meets the egg and life begins, it simultaneously moves into entropy because it simultaneously starts to die. Even as life is growing, it's dying.
Yeah, this ties in somewhat with the conversation I had with Sibylla King recently.
Yeah, I know.
So let me see where I can see some of the connecting points. One of these days that we'll all have to talk together. So she was talking about Persig's view of what are the levels, and he would say that they're patterns of value. There's static patterns of value and dynamic patterns of value, and that the static patterns of value, you have the material or the physical, the pattern of value, static pattern of value. You have the biological, you have the social, and you have the intellectual. And I'm not sold on his way of dividing everything up, but he does make he doesn't, he makes some interesting points about the whole thing. He uses the example of a novel. So he says, you take a computer, and the computer has, well, he had worked with computers. So the computer has its own machine language code that it has for what it does internally. But when you get to the level where you're working with the computer, you're not on that level. You're on a different level, right? For the code that's like the programs that you run are not the same. They're not on the same level as the electronic circuits, for example. And then there's the machine code, and then there's the programs, the soft what we usually think of as software. And then above that, there's maybe like the whatever the thing is that you type into the, say you're typing a novel, right? And that all of these things are stacked up, and they're not. There's no way that you could get the novel by looking at what the circuits are doing in the computer.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot extract the novel from that. You can't extract it from the programming language that's in the computer, and you can't extract it from the programs that you're running on top of that, like the Word software or something like that. And so, but all of those things are supporting, all those levels are supporting that level of the novel that you're typing. But the novel is not actually even restricted to the computer, because it could be on paper, right? It could just be in someone's head, someone's mind, right? So so he talks about that when you go between the levels, that there has to be some little, I don't know, he calls it a tag or a little there's some little hook or something that is very small, but it takes you from one level to another. Okay, and these are his ideas of how things are structured, because you have to be able to, there has to be a connection, but it's a very small part of the whole thing. When you look at each level seems like it almost stands on its own, but it doesn't, because it's got to be supported by the previous level. But you're not going to be able to look at the material level and extract the biological level from it. So like if you can't take a living organism and say, okay, it's got this particular physical structure, it's got this biochemistry going on, it's got all these atoms and molecules, and now I can explain it. Once you get to the higher level, like once you get to the biological level, it goes off on its own. It no longer is following the rules of the level below it. Does that make sense what I said?
Mm-hmm.
So, and he says the same thing's true of the social level, that there is a biological, what you might call biological laws. There's those things which make the biology work. But just looking at all of the biology of even of, you know, say human beings, you're not going to be able to find in their biology the information of their culture, their society, the social level, and their interactions and relationships with one another.
Mhm.
So anyway, I thought that was interesting. I thought that ties in a lot with what you were saying.
Wow, you gave such a good summary of that, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to this again and again because um, obviously, although his idea of levels is a little different than what I've been thinking about, it's the same idea that there's these connecting points between levels.
Right.
That the way I tried to describe it first when I was talking to Paul was because my husband used to work in the chip industry, and so when they first started making chips, the chip, in order to get the information on the chip, or the pathway for the information on the chip, they have to build it in almost like a little city. And it's got
Mhm.
roads and gates and pathways and all that kind of stuff. And they etch the top of the silicon wafer. They etch it with acid, and then the acid burns away. And so then you have these little indentations where all these pathways are. But over time, they needed more space than what was on top of that chip to get all the pathways in, because I mean, now they're up to billions and billions and billions of pathways, and they just won't all fit on one level. So they had to start building levels under and under and under, which are all etched away from the top. Somehow they're able to do that. It's like magic, really. But each level is like its own little city.
Mhm.
It's got skyscrapers and it's got roads, and each level is connected to the level above it, because you have to be able to get the information from that's processed on one level up to the next level, and then you have to get up to the next level and up to the next level. So that information moves up through these little tubules that are called vias, VIA. So that was the picture I had in my brain of all these different levels, like all these different cities. Each has its own life, each has its own probably its own culture, who knows. but but there has to be some connecting point. And at first I thought the connecting point was beauty. So that's where I was exploring. Can I see where the beauty shows up in physics? Is that going to tell me how it connects to the next layer? It is very interesting when you explore all these different domains of knowledge. There is a place where beauty shows up. There's
Mhm.
always a place where beauty shows up, and that in itself is quite mysterious. But then I started seeing, like you were talking about truth, goodness, and beauty with Sevilla, and they're all, what would the word be, coterminous, or
Well, they're in God, they're one. They're
yeah,
one thing.
but the way you
But they're
described it,
they're what we call the transcendentals, the three transcendentals. But they are. This is one of the problems that we have in what Paul Vanderklay likes to refer to as the age of decay, which I like that phrase, is the separation between those things. So one of the things that I've noticed is I look at something like fandom, like when people are fans of, say, a music group, all right, and this is especially true of, I guess, like teenagers and young adults, because they're more on the naive side about human beings, that if they find the music especially compelling or attractive to them, if they like the music, if they see some kind of beauty in it, they're very averse to accepting that perhaps the person who's playing that music is an immoral scumbag, and they very well may be. That their desire, they have an innate desire to link beauty and goodness. They don't want to know that someone who is beautiful or someone who makes something beautiful is at the same time evil. It's very hard. It's for, one of the things you learn as you grow up is those things are not always connected. You know, someone may be very beautiful or able to make something very beautiful, and yet they may not be good and they may not be telling you the truth. And in fact, that truth or that lies will often be couched in something that is beautiful because it gets past your defenses that way, right?
Mhm.
So, but in God, there is no what is, God is beautiful, God is true, God is good, and those are one thing. There's none of that breaking of that. So, like, I think that's one of the things it says in the Bible is that Satan makes himself an angel of light. In other words, it's like makes himself beautiful or makes his lies appear beautiful. And so we get confused by that. But the only reason we get confused is we want those things to be together. We want what is true to be beautiful. We want what is good to be true. We want what is beautiful to be good and true. So it's almost like we have an instinct to not want to have those things separated, and we're disturbed when they are.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's at the apex, or maybe beyond the apex, let's say. But there are a lot of things that line up in kind of the same space. If you really start thinking about what reality is, Jordan Peterson always says reality is what you meet in the next moment. I can't.
So you're encountering it, basically.
I can't. Well, I can't.
Moving into it.
Let's just let that one go for a second, because I can't quite remember the quote. He says the transcendental is what you meet when you err. So when you come to the limit of your knowledge, what you bump into is the transcendental, because what's outside of your knowledge is the transcendental. That's what he says. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I've come to a conclusion as these ideas have gone from being a big complex network maze kind of, it's simplified down to this paradigm of unity with variety, that dominance is also vitally important in a painting. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And boundaries. And those ideas have, it's narrowed down to that for me. So I have this paradigm that I'm working within. And so that's what I'm always listening for now. But love and truth and goodness and beauty and reality and information all seem to be inhabiting the same space for me. And because I ran into this idea the other day that information and love are, I always hesitate to say these things because they're not worked out. So, I'm probably miles off, but they're inhabiting the same space somehow. Because if you think about, let's say communication is fundamental to the universe. That's one of the pictures that I have, that everything comes down to communication. And if we think about it in the world's terms, the loss in communication, the lack of communication is what causes most of our problems. We can't solve problems because each person has their own idea that they're working on. They have their own little word castle, and they're unwilling to communicate with another person what their idea is so the two people could get together and solve the problem. There's no communication going on. And why is that? It's probably because of pride, probably because of fear, which when they boil down are the same thing. We fear communication because maybe somebody will take my idea, or maybe my idea isn't good enough, or I'm afraid of the conflict that will be required to work it out with another person. So there's all this fear wrapped up in not communicating. So if that's what keeps us as human beings from communicating, then the opposite of that must be that perfect communication is an act of love. There's these entities communicating with one another, and God's communication to us is an act of love. And the Logos is God's communication to us. It's an act of love. So out of that act of love, the universe is created. But that act of love is also an act of communication. And for communication to take place, there has to be information. And the information is the physical laws of the universe they're totally composed of information. So when the Big Bang happened and the universe sprang into existence, of course, there's some physicists who now say there was no Big Bang, but let's go with the other guys. Then what came into existence was time and space, although there's some who now are saying that there is no time and space. But at the very least, we know that there's energy, matter, and information. There has to be information because the physical laws are telling the energy, matter what to be doing. Without the information, nothing's going to happen. Even Stephen Hawking said, if you give me gravity and the laws of physics, I'll give you a universe. But of course, you have to have gravity and the laws of physics or you have no universe, right? So they got to come from somewhere. So I've started to see that space inhabited by some paradigm that we can't put a name on because a lot of other things line up in the same space.
Yeah.
Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, which is another triad, right?
Right.
And maybe each of those is composed of another triad because truth, goodness, and beauty are all in one space, and then the way includes the patterns and the direction and all of those things that come out of the elements. And then life, as you said before. So, I start to see graphically, I start to see the picture of Stephen, the guy that has the theory of everything. What's his last name? Stephen Wolfram.
Okay.
He shows these triads with the little circles in them, and each little circle has another triad inside of it. And each little circle has, so it goes all the way down to the very smallest, all the way up to the very biggest. And it's possible for infinite complexity to arise out of infinite simplicity. And to me, that's a perfect picture of God. Only God could make something infinitely simple that could produce something infinitely complex.
You're really going to like the video. I think I put it up yesterday. Joseph Ratzinger talking about the God of the philosophers and how in the early church said, like if you ask the early Christians, so this God you're talking about, is it Zeus or Apollo? Who is the God you're talking about? And they would say, it's the God of the philosophers that we're talking about. It's being itself. But in Christianity, that God of the philosophers, who is being and is pure thought, is also pure love. So you're not there. There's no longer this separation. It's no longer as though thought and intellect go above love or above relationship. It's all together in the Christian conception of God. God's thought is loving. God's loving is thought, is creative thought. All of that goes together in God, and Ratzinger makes that point that it's together. It's together. All these things go together in God, but they're together in God, but they're not in God so that God can keep them to himself. They're together in God so that he can share them.
Yes, they're together in God so that he can communicate them.
Communicate them, right?
So I was having this conversation with my daughter this morning that because we're talking about her job, which requires a lot of communication. He said one of the reasons people fear communication is that communication requires love. And I said, I don't mean the squishy kind of love. I mean the active kind of love that's willing to risk, that's willing to nurture, that's willing to care for, that's willing to expose your vulnerabilities, that's willing to give the necessary information. That's the active love. That's the agape.
Right.
And that's what's required for communication to take place. So without love, there really can be no good communication, no meaningful, successful communication. And maybe this is where it comes down to John Vervaeke's comment the other day that he didn't like Jordan Peterson's teaching because Jordan Peterson is trying to produce heroes, where John Vervaeke thinks what we need to produce is community.
Mhm.
But I thought, well, that's a singularly, well, I thought that showed a lack of, maybe because he's so busy doing what he does, he hasn't had the time to really look into what Jordan Peterson is teaching. Because what Jordan Peterson is teaching is not how to build heroes, but it's how every human life goes through this process of suffering and renewal, and that in order to navigate that, you have to have certain heroic principles. But those heroic, as we know, walking with the Lord, that heroic principle is given into us to meet those challenges as we go along the road. But the whole idea of community is impossible without communication.
Yeah.
And communication is impossible without love, and maybe love is impossible without people who have learned the meaning of sacrifice and renewal. So
Right. He got
I-
a lot of pushback on that I think when he put up the video on his channel of the conversation that he had with Paul and myself, there was a bit of pushback on his characterization of what Jordan Peterson was saying. And some people were saying, look, in order for a community to exist, there have to be heroes. It takes this heroic impulse in order to build the community, in order to give to the community what it needs. I think there's some, I think there's nuances to all of this, because of course Jordan Peterson does say that the paradigmatic hero is Christ, that, pick up your cross and, climb up the hill kind of thing, that he does make Christ the paradigmatic hero. And it's not a warrior kind of hero. It's a heroism that lays down your life for your friends, right? That's that kind of heroism. So I think that John Vervaeke's view of Jordan Peterson might be slightly jaundiced, and there perhaps is some good reason for that. But at the same time, I think Jordan Peterson's own presentation of all of this, it lacks a nuance that I would like to see coming into the conversation, and that has to do with the feminine. So the hero is always presented from the masculine side. Now the hero, now women of course have the masculine within them and the men have the feminine within them. We both have both parts. But I would like to see some more attention in this space to what it means to be a feminine hero, or what is that feminine model of life that differs from the masculine.
did you read Maps of Meaning?
I have not read the whole book. No.
He has a whole big section
Yeah.
in there on the woman, the feminine, the matriarchal, And
Yeah,
I
I did.
think, I have a suspicion that the new book is going to include a lot of that.
I did listen to all the lectures that he did about it. I listened to a couple of years worth of all of his college lectures
Mhm.
on on maps of meaning, because he did teach the book. The book was the course that he did teach. And I did read part of the book. I think somebody made off with my copy, and I've looked for it and I can't find it. But or I may have loaned it to someone and not gotten it back or something. I might have to get myself another copy. But I'm not talking so necessarily specifically about what might be in the depths of the book, as I am about all of the kind of like public conversation, both what Jordan Peterson has presented. And I am by no means saying that he shouldn't have presented what he presented. And I love that it appealed to men. I don't find that to be in any way a demerit of it. All I'm saying is that there's and it's not like there's no application of it for women. There is a lot. But what I'm saying is that the difference in how we would live, the difference in how we would imitate Christ is different. It's different for men and for women. I try to address that in my channel when I talk about the different vocations of the male and female, and the way that in the world they're trying to give an account of the feminine or the female is to turn it into the masculine.
Yeah.
Right? Which even like, I know in one of the videos that Brett and Heather Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine did together, they're talking about what's going on with all of this gender stuff. And she used the expression that it's an erasure of in the name of feminism, the female is being erased.
Mhm.
The feminine is being erased. And so,
Well, sure, because if you want equality with men in the modern view, that means you have to be able to be like a man and
right,
do everything a man does and get everything a man gets, and completely loses the feminine completely.
right, and enter into a masculine way of competing with men.
Mhm.
That you see in the movies all the time now. It's just, so I think see, Jordan Peterson is, I would say, still on the side of the feminists, not the radical feminists, but he's still on the side of the feminists, in that he makes a comment. He says how our society is benefited when women can go out, into the world and give their gifts to the world, in careers and stuff like that. That we wouldn't want our society to be bereft of these gifts. However, what we've done is we've made the home bereft, the home and family bereft of the gifts. Right? So it's almost like it sounds real good, but then what it ends up doing is saying that the home is not important, that motherhood is not important, that somehow there's this other thing out there that's greater, it's more important, and we'll free women up to go out there. And what we've done is we've destroyed anyone's sense that they have a home, or that home is of value.
Absolutely. Well, I do think that he feels that. I think he feels that the same way that you feel it.
Okay.
Although, if there was how long and hard he had to think before he put out the C16 video, because he knew he was taking a stand on something that was going to be controversial. He had no idea how controversial. There's an even bigger snake in that whole idea of the feminine, which he mentioned in one of his lectures. He said, yes, we have all these women out in the workplace now, and they have added a lot of, inventiveness and creativity into the workplace, and that's been a benefit to society. But we have no idea of the long-term consequences of the birth control pill, which is what generated that move.
Right.
He doesn't just mean the physical ramifications of the birth control pill, but he means what is it going to do to society as a whole, that women are no longer looking at having babies as being a primary focus of their lives and of nurturing family and all of that. What spools out of that is a huge pile of snakes that I know he's aware of because I heard him say it, but I don't think he's ever been. For one thing, anytime he ever mentions it in an interview, they shift gears immediately and go off to something else. They never let him explore that. I would like to hear him explore where he thinks that goes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he can explore where he thinks it goes, or all of us can take a very clear-eyed, honest look at where it's already gone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that we could probably get some good indications right from that. Yeah.
I mean,
So,
we're definitely on a trajectory towards zero population growth. But it's a funny thing. When I was a young mom, so I'm looking at 1972, okay? I was a young mom. ZPG was all the rage.
oh yes, right.
Yes, right? There should be zero population growth because we're overrunning the planet. There's not enough resources. And there's going to be global cooling, and we're all going to freeze to death in 20 years. And there's, it was all of that stuff. And my first husband and I looked at that and we thought, okay, we're not going to have any more children because that's just wrong to bring more children into this world, with this problem. And so that was it. We didn't have any more children. But you fast forward 40 years, more than 40 years, but like 40 years after that, all of a sudden they're talking about declining population all over Europe. The US is right at the edge of beginning to have a declining population. So the only way you can keep your culture going is by importing workers from outside because of declining population. So zero population growth was not the thing anymore based on population figures, but now it's becoming a thing based on the cultural attitudes of the young women. Why should I have children? Why should I suffer? Why should I sacrifice? That's what I hear all the time from the young women.
Yeah, and then you have other implications of that, because when people get older, then there's no one to lovingly care for them.
Yep.
Right? So then they're cared for institutionally, which is often not good. And then you end up getting a push for euthanasia,
Pretty soon there's nobody to support the Social Security system.
Right. Well, but beyond that, there's also just the fact that, like I know a couple who are getting up in years, and, they moved to, I think it's Oregon, is the state that has like assisted suicide, right? Because it's just like they don't have kids, and it's like, well, there'll come a point where we should just, trot on out of here, at our, when we want to, because there's not that kind of, they know that their other option is kind of like to be in an institution of some sort with little autonomy, you know. And then a lot of people are facing that exact situation. And, you know, it's, you're not thinking about what it's going to be like when you're 80, when you're 25, right? You're not thinking, well, someday I'll be, or you're not thinking about, your grandchildren and all of that when you're first having children. I try to tell people all the time, that have one child, I try and say, give your grandchildren cousins. The only way you can do that is by having more than one child, because I have 9 grandchildren, and so I have these sets of cousins, right? And you see in the dynamic with the cousins that is so interesting, that the cousins are almost like siblings, but without the sibling rivalry. So you get all the benefits of a sibling without the sibling rivalry in your cousin. And I see how close they are with each other, and just, and you realize, I mean, now some of my grandkids are in their early 20s, you realize that they have friends for life. Other friends, they're friends they meet at work, or at school or whatever like this. For the most part, those friends will be coming and going. If they moved somewhere, they'll have friends for a while, but it's not that often that you have a friend that's your friend for like your whole life, right? But their cousins are going to be their friends for their whole life. They will always be there for each other. And the only way for that to happen is you have to think ahead. Not that I was thinking ahead when I was having my children, but it's later on dawned on me, the fact that I had more than one child is what made it possible for them to have the cousins.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that, because I grew up, my mother had 6 siblings. And so whenever there were family reunions at grandma's house, which usually was 3 or 4 times a year, there'd be 30 of us cousins that would be getting together. And we just had a lot of fun together, and I had a huge sibling rivalry with my brother. So that was a non-relationship. But with all these cousins, we had lots and lots of fun. The sad part was that when grandma died, I was only 20 years old, and there was no longer a central hub for everybody to come together, and everybody dispersed, and I never saw any of those people again.
Oh, goodness.
So I didn't have those lifelong friendships. But I am super thankful that later in life, I decided to have another child. So my daughter now, who is 26, I had when I was 46 years old.
Okay.
So I gave up on the zero population growth idea and decided to have another one. And
You have 2.
Because children are wonderful.
Yeah.
So I have 2.
So you have your children each have a sibling. Then you have 2 children.
Yeah. Well, they're half sisters, because the second daughter was from a second husband. But it's still a treasure.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, she's a treasure in my life. There's no question about that.
Okay, well, I think we have been talking a little over an hour, and it's probably long enough for this session. I thank you so much for helping me kind of get into your head and the journey that you're going on intellectually, and how interesting it is and how it ties in. To me, it ties in with everything. It ties in with what Sibylla King is doing, ties in with what John Vervaeke is doing, ties in with Jonathan Pageau's talk about the different levels of reality. He talks a lot about unity, multiplicity, and the one and the many and all that. And it's so neat. And you have brought such interesting people into the conversation from these contacts that you've made. I love the woman who wrote the books about Jordan Peterson, but she also did the Chinese herbal thing.
The 5 elements.
5 elements thing.
Yeah.
She was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. She has written lots more books about Jordan Peterson. She's just pumping them out.
Really?
And right now she's working on one based on whenever she meets online one of these guys that has had a transformation in his life,
Mhm.
She talks to him and gets his story, and she's writing a book of all these stories.
Wow.
I think that's going to be lit.
Oh,
I
I
mean,
think
really, she could probably spend the rest of her life writing books about those stories, but
definitely. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so she's super busy, which is why I haven't been able to have her on again. And I just want to tell you what's coming up. I
Okay.
just taped one yesterday with Matthew and Michael, and we were talking about the fourth point of radical orthodoxy, which is about theurgy, and we ended up talking about liturgy quite a bit. And so that, it's so interesting, the connections between all of that and the scientific frame, because this whole idea that there's a divide between science and faith is completely ludicrous. They're
Right.
intimately connected at every single possible point. And then tomorrow I'm talking with a physicist that I've had long time written communication with. I have reams and reams and reams of written communication with him about some of these ideas. And he's going to be on tomorrow talking about thermodynamics and the origin of life. So I'm very eager to have that conversation with him. And the fun thing is that from the beginning until now, because I've learned more and I've adapted and my frame has changed little by little over time, it makes it a little bit easier for me to keep up with these people and know what kind of questions to ask. So it
Yeah.
just getting richer all the time.
Yeah. The more you're able to refine your question as you go down different paths and stuff.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think certain things that you said are converging with where I'm going with the Ratzinger book.
Well, I've got to get in and listen
Definitely.
to that Ratzinger one on the God of the Philosophers. That sounds really good. I can't keep up with everything you do because you're so prolific.
Well, goodness, I don't think I'm nearly as prolific as you are.
Oh no, I wish I could do what you do, where you just talk directly to the screen and explain that book. Because I would love to take maps of meaning and just go through it paragraph by paragraph and talk about it. And I wish I could do what you do with making the thumbnails, because your thumbnails are always so creative. But I just stick with the basic one that they hand me because I don't know how to do all that other
Well,
stuff.
it's I think it's Jeff. I think it might be Jeff. It's one of the guys from the Discord server that he explained to me how to make the thumbnails. So I can tell you how to do that. It's pretty easy. You'll probably have an easy time on it. They're getting a little less detailed because my hands are pretty shot. I was an editor of an online magazine for a number of years, and I did all that website administration, all that clicking on the mouse, and especially my right hand is pretty, the joint of the thumb joint is pretty shot. So I have to be careful not to not to overstretch myself with making all that kind of stuff. And that's why I don't really do much writing anymore. I used to do a lot of writing. So it's really good for me to have a medium of being able to talk, because I can't be writing articles anymore. If I spend an hour typing on the computer, I'm just like, I can barely use my hand the rest of the day. So it's
Wow.
a good medium for me.
Yeah.
All righty, Karen, we will get together again.
Sounds good. Maybe
And
next time we can talk about dominance.
all right, I know nothing about that other than like thinking about a theme in music, but
Well,
that
there you
would
go.
be a that
Just
would be a
follow that thread.
that would be a great topic you can illuminate me on. And someday we're going to get. I threatened Paul Vanderklay that I was going to get the Paul Vanderklay women together, and so he was properly horrified about the idea that I might put Paul Vanderklay women in the title of the video, which of course makes it a certainty that that's exactly what I'll do. All
That
right.
sounds so great, Mary. Can't wait. We'll
All
talk to you
right.
soon.
You take care. Bye.